All right. Hello, everyone. As we get started here, I just need to get all of my stuff together. And it's kind of weird today because I have a guest. Now, she's not going to be speaking, but she's in my office with me. And so instead of me doing this all by myself, um, I have an audience. And so it's kind of a little bit weird for me, but I'm super excited. Sarah's here with me. She is going to be making sure that all the technical stuff that I've had issues with in the past, all that technical stuff is not going to happen. And she'll be monitoring the chat and we'll have a really good time today. So thank you very much for joining us as people are logging on. Hopefully there aren't. Could you also just kind of take a look at my email from time to time just to see if anybody's having challenges getting in? We have to send a link. See, that's why she's here. She's here to help. So, for all those solopreneurs out there that are doing all the things and you're really struggling because you're the producer of your podcast, you're the producer of your YouTube live show, all of that stuff, you need a Sarah. So, invest in a Sarah. Not my Sarah, a Sarah. So that's just a little bit of a public service announcement and a little extra tip for today. Okay, so here's what we're going to be doing. Leadership doesn't have to cost you your peace. Let me say that again. Leadership doesn't have to cost you your peace, and faith doesn't belong outside the workplace. And that is what Take Jesus to Work Day is all about. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Melissa McCormick. I am the owner of Grace and Salt Leadership Academy. And once upon a time, I wanted to argue cases in the courtroom. But instead, I traded that courtroom for the boardroom. And after 32 years in corporate America at an amazing company called Taylor Company, I decided to venture out on my own. And now, what do? Now I help business owners and business leaders, those leaders within the business, I help them to get out of the weeds. I help them with getting out of that day to day so that they can build really strong teams, empower those teams, make sure that decisions are made where the decisions need to be made, and they can run the business instead of that business running them. So, my goal for Take Jesus to Work Day is to be the place where faith meets real leadership. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. But as always, I want to open in prayer. I do this to center ourselves, but to center me, to be sure that I am, the message that I have for everybody and that I've prepared for today is the message that I am supposed to share with you. And we want to world outside, right? So wherever you are, if you're in your cubicle, if in your car, wherever you are, I want you to try to just walls and minutes or so. So okay, if you would please join me in prayer, that would be lovely. Um is my camera? I can't see my camera. Am I still? Okay. My camera, just a little side note, my camera moves with me, so I have to be careful. And I can't see my camera. So Sarah is going to give me a high sign if all of a sudden my camera is looking at her and not at me. All right, back to what we're doing today. So here we go. Let's bow our heads or pray however you pray. But dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for each and every person who is participating today or watching this on the replay. Today's episode is about influence, and you taught us how to master that influence and how to lead without anyone watching. So today I ask for your wisdom and that everyone here is open to what they are about to receive, and that my words, more importantly, that my words are your words, and that we all are learning and growing together to serve those that you have put in our path. Amen. So it's so funny because Sarah's here that I feel like I'm on the pulpit and I'm preaching to her. All right. And so pretty soon she's going to be saying amen. And we're going to have a ton of energy going on in this room. Okay. So now, before we get started, I want to be sure you have a way to take notes and Salt Journal. If you don't and you're interested in that, please let me know. Send me a note, send me a DM, something, contact me. But if you have some way to take notes, that can be on your device, however you do it. But we're going to have some reflection questions that I'm going to ask you to answer or just kind of sit with following our program today. And that goes for you too, Sarah. So, she's going to participate, even though she's my techie today, and always. But So, and the other thing that I want you to do is I want you to be sure you have a way of take notes. And then the other thing is I want you to have your Bible or your Bible app. So I'm using my app today because I'm going to be going back and forth between different books. If you have your Bible, then my suggestion, we're going to be focusing in the book of Ruth today, which is is just an amazing story how today's episode just was revealed. Honestly, it was a total God thing. So grab it, click it open, go to Ruth, and we'll spend most of our time in Ruth, but I will be going back and forth. So I'm going to be using my Bible app today. Okay. So today, as you know from my promotions and things, that we're starting and we're going to just talk about my grandbabies. So Valerie was born 2 weeks ago, super excited, and her 2-year-old brother Finley is they're all doing great. Amanda's doing great, Sean's doing great. It's been wonderful to see our children become just incredible parents. So that's been amazing. And going from one child to two, so I can actually say grandchildren now instead of grandchild or grandson. So that's very special to me as well. So here's how this fits into influence without a title. Like, if you don't have children of your own, no problem. You've probably been with children, right? In general, you've probably have been with children, and you know that when a baby enters the room, everything shifts. So last night, let me give you an example. Last night, the kids were over. Amanda and Sean were over with the two, with Finn and Valerie. And Finn wanted to play Duolingo on my phone. So that's our thing. He calls it the owl. And so whenever he says owl, I know we're going to speak Spanish together and we're going to do this Duolingo thing. And when I decided we had been doing it way too long, and no, we no longer were going to play with Yaya's phone, he flipped. Like, he flipped out. He's 2, right? So he had a fit. That's kind of influence because Yaya wanted to give him what he wanted. We didn't. We managed through his tantrum, but that's influence. When that baby enters a room or Finley enters the room, kind of everything shifts, right? Schedules change, priorities reorder, conversations soften, possibly. Not particularly in our house, but typically, right? Amanda's breastfeeding. So that means that her schedule is all based on Valerie's feeding schedule. Nobody has handed them authority. No one has given Valerie a title, but yet she influences everything, everything. She doesn't lead because she's that adult in the room. She leads just because she's here. She leads because of her presence. So I've been kind of sitting with that for a bit, and it reminded me that that's exactly how Jesus talks about influence. And so this is where we're going to start today. He didn't point to the powerful. He didn't point to the polished. When he taught about greatness, he pointed to children. So we're going to start in Matthew 18. And so here's where we are. So the disciples, now imagine this. So whenever I read the Bible, I always imagine what it was like in their time and where they're at. Now, I've never been to Jerusalem. I've never been to Israel. So, but we've all seen pictures. We've all seen the Middle East. We've seen Bethlehem. We've seen Jerusalem, right? It's all on the news. So today we can visualize it more than imagine it. And so I envision what's happening there. So at that time, the disciples came to Jesus and they asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? So I'm reading from Matthew 18. Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Here's what he did. He called a little child to him, right? And he placed, excuse me, I don't know why I'm getting all choked up here for a second. He placed that child among them. And he said this. He said, truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name, welcomes me. Okay. So he called this child over and he's like, look, you have to have faith like a child. You have to believe like a child. That's what he's saying. And so then once you believe like a child and you respond in your faith and trust in Jesus, then you have you will be welcomed into heaven. And I find that extremely difficult sometimes, to be honest with you. All right. It's really hard to believe as a child and to love and to have faith like a child. But that's exactly what we're supposed to do. And that's where we are taught about influence. Children don't influence by control. They influence by trust, by dependence, and by being fully present. He also does, I'm just going to read one more verse here in Mark chapter 9, 35. He says this. He says, I just have to share this just a little bit because I always, when I'm reading the Bible and I'm reading a verse, I don't like to just read that verse, right? I want to read the verse before so I can get context. And then sometimes I continue and read afterwards. And so when I was preparing for today, I read the verse before. So I'm in Mark 9, verse 34. Actually, I want to go to 33. So I think this is funny. He says, or the Bible says, they came to Capernaum. So this is Jesus and the disciples. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" Okay, so he knew that the disciples were arguing about something, but they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Okay, so can you see this? It is dusty road. They got sandals on. They've got ropes. Okay, this is what the vision is in my head. I don't know what it looks like in your head. But you're in the, you're on a dusty road, you're walking to Capernaum, and they are like, so I'm the greatest. Like I'm the greatest. Jesus is going to think I'm the greatest. And Paul's going to say, no, 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 that's not right. And, the others are going to say, well, no, 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 it's me. It's me. So you can see them doing this. And so, and Jesus knows he knew that this is what they were going through and he wanted to hear it from them, but they didn't because they also were probably a little, uncomfortable with that because it wasn't the right thing to do. So then sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, so this is verse 35, and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. And then the next verse says, he took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. Okay, so it's the same thing that we had heard from Mark, just a little bit differently. And again, it's leading with influence and trust and faith as if a child. And that's really where I want to start today, because many of us have been taught explicitly and implicitly that influence comes after the title, right? How many of us think, well, once, in fact, I was on a coaching call recently, and this person is doing a great job leading from the fringes, leading from, right? But you get frustrated because sometimes you're like, why isn't my boss doing this? Why do I have to do this? Why isn't my boss doing this? And so once you may be thinking, or maybe one time in your world, you might have been thinking, what I'm going to wait until I become supervisor, or I'm going to, it's not my job. It's not my role. I don't want to step on anybody's toes. So once I get X, Y, insert the blank, X, Y, Z, then I will have influence. And that's really not the case. That is not the case at all. And that's what I'm going to show you that through a very powerful biblical lesson today. Jesus says that influence often comes before authority, and sometimes without it entirely. Okay, think about that. Sometimes without it entirely. So I want you to just hold this question in your mind as we're digging into the book of Ruth, and that is, where am I already influencing others simply by how I show up? Like, where is that in my world when I show up? It could be personally, it could be professionally. Where am I waiting for a title before I step fully into influence? Where am I holding back when I know I probably do have the influence that can help change, insert the blank. So be thinking about that. Like, write that down just so that you've got that in your mind as we're going through our program today. Okay. So if you've been following me at all this year, you know that my word for 2026 is surrender. I've been trying desperately to surrender my business and my life to God, to Jesus, Holy Spirit, all three. And in doing so, I've also been trying to hear him. Like, I'll be talking to my friends and they'll be like, "Oh, yes, I heard this, God spoke to me last night, or I had this dream," or whatever it is. And I'm like, "I want to be you. I want God to send me a note. Like, I want a written note that says, 'Melissa, this is your purpose. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Good job, faithful servant,'" right? That's what I want him to tell me. And sometimes he does. Like, sometimes I hear him, but I want to hear him like all the time. So this this happened. This truly happened. I've been spending a lot more time in prayer, um, but besides that, because I realized that in order to hear him, I have to stop talking. So I have to listen. And so I don't even remember what I was doing specifically, but I was at my computer and I wasn't preparing for this. I was doing something completely different. And the name Ruth came to my mind. And I'm like, Ruth, why would I even think that? So then I thought, whoa, maybe that wasn't me, right? Maybe that was Holy Spirit saying, Melissa, you need to look at Ruth. And I'm like, Ruth, I don't even know a Ruth. Like, I, who's Ruth? And then it dawned on me, Ruth from the Bible. And so um I flipped around because I do my emails and stuff on that desk, and this is my podcasting YouTube Bible reading area. So I flipped my chair around and I grabbed the Bible and I started reading Ruth. If you have not read it, I really do strongly suggest you read it. It's a short book. It's 4 chapters, but it is a great story. And so as I was reading Ruth, I'm like, holy smokes. You want to talk about influence without a title? Oh my gosh, this is so critical. So not only did Jesus use a child to teach us about influence, but he wasn't introducing this new idea, right? He was reminding us of something God had been showing us long ago. Long before Jesus gathered his disciples, there was a woman who lived this out and without even realizing the impact that she would have. And her name was Ruth. She didn't influence from the center. She influenced from the margins, from the fringe, from outside, from behind. She wasn't born into the right family. She didn't even worship the right God at first. She didn't arrive in Bethlehem with confidence or certainty. She arrived as a foreigner. So I want to take you back. So I'm going to take you back a little bit before we kind of get to Ruth. And I want to introduce you to Naomi. So, okay. So Naomi is her mother-in-law. And so before Naomi met Ruth, Naomi and her husband and their 2 sons migrated I guess migrated from Bethlehem to Moab. Okay, so to a different country. And they did that because there was a famine going on in Bethlehem. So they needed to go to Moab. So fast forward a little bit and there goes my camera. So fast forward a little bit and her husband passes away. And so her 2 sons need to get married. And so they married 2 Moab women. One of those women was Ruth. Okay. So that's where we are right now. Um, and as they are having their life and doing all of that in Moab, the sons die. So now we have 3 women, Naomi, the sister-in-law, and Ruth, who have to decide what to do. First of all, they're women. Let's just think about that, how women were treated back in that day. And Naomi wants to go home. She's homesick. Her family is gone. She wants to go home and she wants to go back to Bethlehem. So I imagine that these 3 women, they start because the daughter-in-laws are like, we're going with you. And Naomi is saying, no, 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 no. You can't go. You guys are Moabites. Stay here. Stay with your family. Stay with your gods. Do what you do. You do not need to come with me. It's okay. I will be fine, but I want to go home. And so the other sister-in-law, or daughter-in-law, excuse me, she leaves and she's like, "Yeah, okay, no problem." So she goes back to her home, but Ruth doesn't. Ruth says this. Ruth says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God, my God." Okay? So they argue about this for a while and finally Naomi says, "Okay, fine. Fine. I get it. Fine, you can come with me." But Naomi had released Ruth, right? She had said, "Look, sweetheart, I love you, but you need to stay with your people. You do not have to come with me." Because Ruth, let's think about this. She was going to a foreign land. So she was going from Moab to Bethlehem and she she didn't know um if Bethlehem would welcome her. She didn't know if Naomi could protect her. She didn't know if she would survive. All she knew was who she was committing to and who she was committing with. And that's where influence without a title begins. Okay. It doesn't begin with clarity. It doesn't begin with conviction. It doesn't begin with confidence. She didn't say, "You know what, Naomi, I really appreciate that very much. I'm gonna stay for a couple weeks, and if it doesn't work out, I'm heading back." She didn't say that. She didn't say, "I'm gonna follow you as long as it's safe." But once it, because I don't think about it. I mean, they could have been killed along the way. They get to Bethlehem. She's a foreigner. She's not accepted very well. She could have been raped. She could have been murdered. She could have been all kinds of things. Fill in the blank, right? But she doesn't care. She absolutely doesn't care. And so as I was preparing for this and going through this and reading, honestly, reading the story for what seems to be like the first time, but I know I've read it before. But it seemed very familiar to me. And so I'm just going to share this personal story. And when it comes to influence without a title, and that is that many years ago, um, I was in middle management, leading the export department at Taylor. We were responsible for entering orders and shipping ice cream machines all over the world. And then, like what typically happens in corporate America, a new boss showed up. Okay. So, and I'm thinking, "Oh, super, another person I get to train. Yay." Right. But what happened was he and I became very trusted confidants. And we had this pact. And I don't even remember. I worked for Jeremy for um 30 years. Okay. I was 2 years in when he started at Taylor. And we had this pact. I don't know when it started, but it was you go, I go, you stay, I stay. So when you're having, and we meant it. So when you're having one of those days and I'd go in and he'd see the look on my face and he's like, "You staying?" And I'm like, "Yep." And he goes, "Okay, then I'm staying." Right. And that went on for like 30 years. So obviously we weren't going to quit or anything like that, but it was that pact because I knew he had my back and he knew I had his back. And that, when I think about that pact and that relationship, that whole theory, I mean, it shaped how I lead. And somehow, we absolutely influenced each other. And that is what Ruth is showing us so clearly, that when you trust that person, when you find that person, it's safe, right? That person is safe, then is you're able to then influence your world around you as well without a title. Because that influence, I just really want you to get this. Influence does not always move down an organizational chart, right? It's not always from the boss down. Sometimes it moves sideways, sometimes it moves up, right? That was the relationship that Jeremy and I had. And many times that type of movement happens even before we have a language for it, right? What I learned during that time was that Ruth shows up next, right? Okay, so it's about loyalty isn't proven in the words, right? It's how we show up day to day. So in the workplace, I want you to think about this. Influence starts when others can trust us. So trust is built when people know where you stand, what you value, and who you're aligned with. Does that make sense, right? Trust is built when people know where you stand, what you value, and who you're aligned with. Here's what I don't want you to miss, that Ruth didn't know this decision would change her life. She didn't know. She knew that she was going to follow Naomi no matter what. And that was my relationship with Jeremy. I just knew. The man, we were very good friends, and so I trusted him implicitly, and I knew that I didn't even think about it, honestly, because I didn't even think that I didn't know that eventually I would be the senior vice president of the company. I didn't know that. That's not why he and I became these trusted people and had this strong friendship. That wasn't why that happened. It wasn't calculated at all. And that's Ruth's situation. It wasn't calculated. She didn't go with Naomi because she didn't have a that was the only option she had, and so she wasn't going to stay here, because if she went with Naomi, then who knows, she could be, fill in the blank. It had nothing to do with that. So we're always asked to show up with integrity before the recognition comes. Okay, so show up with integrity before you get the recognition. Stay aligned before the clarity comes. Be loyal when it would be easier to disengage. That's super important. So here's one of the reflection areas right now. So here's what I want you to write down and think about just for a few seconds here. And that is, where am I being invited to commit without guarantees? Like, where am I in my life, personal or professional, am I being invited to do something without a guarantee of an outcome for me? Does that make sense? Is my loyalty driven by convenience, or is it driven by conviction? Right? How does that work? Okay. So, um kind of moving through this, Ruth arrives in Bethlehem. She doesn't ask for special treatment. She doesn't demand protection. She doesn't lead with her story, meaning she doesn't go to somebody and say, "Okay, you know what just happened? My father-in-law dies, then I marry one of the sons, then he dies." And she doesn't tell the sob story about how it took how much think about how long it probably took her and Naomi to travel to Bethlehem from Moab. I have no idea where that is in distance relationship, but it was probably a journey. She doesn't start with that. What she does is she goes to work. She goes to work. So in the chapter of Ruth, it tells us that she enters the fields to glean. So, okay. So I am in northern Illinois. We have a lot of cornfields around here. And so in the fall after harvest and you're driving past the cornfields, you see all kinds of corn stalks that just are broken, right? I want you just to think about that if you're familiar with what I'm talking about, and if you're not, Google it or get a picture, an image. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. There's just all kinds of, just broken corn stalks laying in the fields. Well, that's what happens when you harvest wheat and barley as well. So in Bethlehem, that's what they do. That's what the farmers were doing, as they had wheat fields and barley fields. So what she did was she went to the I'd say probably the operations manager. I don't know what you'd call him today, but she went to that man and she said, "Look, here's what I want to do. I'm not going to interrupt the harvesters. I'm not going to interrupt the women that are following the harvesters getting the next best pieces of barley. I'm going to go after everybody, and I'm just going to pick up the pieces that I can pick up. Is that okay?" And he said, "Sure." So she did it from sun up to sundown, and she just kept that up. She did that because she needed to feed Naomi. They needed food. She didn't do it so that she was being noticed. She didn't do it for the recognition. She did it because it was necessary to do. And she was faithful to Naomi, and they needed to eat. So now in Ruth 2, Boaz, who is the owner of the farm. So, okay, so imagine this. He comes back and he's talking to his operations manager, and he sees this woman in the fields picking up the scraps. I mean, honestly, that's what it was, picking up the scraps. And he's like, "Wait a minute, so I'm just gonna read it because I like reading from the Bible better than just making imprima what am I saying? Um, rather than paraphrasing it. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so here's what Boaz does. He says in Ruth 2, he asks his um the manager, whatever, I don't know what to call him, right? Who is this woman? And so he says, this is what she's been doing, and it's been kind of amazing. So he reaches out to her and he says this in chapter 2, verse 8. He says this to Ruth. He says, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." He was her angel. He was absolutely her guardian angel. Can you imagine if she went to a different farm? Right? God led her there. She didn't know why. She didn't even know that God led her there, is my guess. She was there because I need food. And so that is amazing, and it reminds me of a story, of my own personal story. So I lived in Spain in 1980, goodness, 1986, something like that. And a friend of mine and I decided we were taking the train and we were going down to Portugal, and we were broke. But we found enough money to go down to southern Spain. And on our way home, we had just enough money for the metro when we got to Madrid. So we only had enough money to get from the train station in Madrid to our home in Cuatro Caminos, which is the neighborhood that we lived in. And so we were at the train station in Cadiz, and this American man and a couple of his buddies that was traveling with them stopped because they knew we were American and had stopped to ask us what we were doing. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And we said, "Well, we have our train tickets, and then we just have enough money to get, take the metro from the train station in Madrid to get home, but we don't have any money here for food or for shelter." So, or for, we didn't say shelter, um, for a hotel. So we're just gonna, we honestly, so now I'm 20 years old at this time, 21 years old. And so we had this harebrained idea that Kathy was her name. Kathy would sleep, a couple hours, and then I would be watching. I would sleep a couple hours and she would be watching. So we thought we could do this overnight. So Bill was the guy's name. He said, "Ladies, you can't do that. First of all, it's very, very dangerous in this train station. So here's what we're going to do." And he took us, I can't even believe I accepted this, but I did. He took us to a restaurant and he fed us. And then he took us to a hotel, which we hadn't stayed in hotels. We were staying in hostels. Took us to a hotel. He rented a hotel room for both of us, and he left. And he said, "You guys know how to get back to the train station and you'll be fine. But I want to know you're going to be safe." So he kind of was my Boaz, right? So he kind of was like that guardian angel, and that's who Boaz was to Ruth. And I just find that story of Boaz giving her instructions, because what's super important about that is she listened, right? She absolutely listened to him. She could have said, "No, look, I need more barley than the scraps I'm getting from your farm. And so it's going to be fine. It's going to be totally fine." But she didn't. She absolutely listened to him. So, okay, now I I, I feel a little bit of a conflict. Okay, so, and you might be feeling it too. So that's why I'm going to pause for a second. You might be thinking, "Melissa, you have a program that's called the Esther Project, and you teach women how to speak up, how to find their voice, how to have courage," right? You teach us that. And now you're telling me the complete opposite. What gives? Well, that was kind of my thought too. As I'm going through this lesson and I'm thinking, "Wait a minute, what am I doing?" And so then I kept building it and realizing that Ruth and Esther are not opposites. They're sequential. And this is really powerful because I'm even thinking that I should really write a book about this. But Ruth didn't stay silent because she lacked courage. So let's really understand that. She stayed faithful because it wasn't time to speak yet. Esther speaks because she has influence, where Ruth builds her influence before she ever needs a voice. That makes sense, right? So Ruth, she builds that influence. Esther already had influence, and so she was able to speak up. Ruth needed to build her influence before she could speak up. That's very, very important. We don't speak up to be seen. That's the thing. We don't speak up to, excuse me, stewardship requires it because it's the right thing to do. Because we know that if this situation is resolved and we've got a great idea, we speak up for the greater good. We don't sit back. And if we're speaking up just so that, hey, it's me and I want attention, then it's the wrong reason why we're speaking up. So I hope that distinction makes sense because Ruth, she shows us how credibility is formed, and it's formed through consistency. It's formed through humility and faithful work when no one is watching, when nobody is giving her, at a girl. Esther, she shows us how credibility is used through courage, discernment, and a voice at the right moment. Now, granted, she needed a little bit of a nudge from her uncle, but she was queen at that time. So she had influence. And this is the part that I really don't want you to miss. Ruth did not advocate for herself in those fields. She was working. She was rolling up her shirt sleeves, right? She let her character speak for herself. That's really an important factor. Where Esther, she didn't speak impulsively either. She prayed about it. She waited until the moment mattered the most. And that's the leadership model that many of us need. First, we need to build trust. Then we need to discern the timing. And then we need to use our voice boldly. And that's not passivity. Like, I'm not saying sit back and don't do anything. That's wisdom. That is really the essence of what I teach. And so, but yet it's often the missing piece. We're taught to either stay quiet too long or speak before credibility is established. And Ruth and Esther, they show us a better way. And that's where through this whole lesson today, I'm thinking there's a book here. I know it. I'm absolutely positive. So if you feel just maybe speaking to the person who needs to hear this, if you're in a season where your work feels unseen, like where faithfulness feels like it's really slow and you're wondering when or if it will be the time to speak. Ruth reminds us this, that you are not behind, you are being formed. And that distinction between stewardship and voice is why this next verse matters most. So I'm skipping now. I'm skipping from Ruth and I'm going into Colossians 3, verse 23. And here's what it says. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as working for the Lord, not for human. Well, my version says human masters. There's other translations that say not for man, right? So whatever you do it with all of your heart for God, not for anybody else, but for the Lord, not for any human person. And that verse is not about being silent. It's about staying faithful because God is our audience. Yeah. Ruth lived long before that was ever written, right? Colossians is in the New Testament. Ruth is in the Old Testament. So she lived much, how many years, and I didn't do the math, but how many years before it was ever written? She worked as though God was watching and trusted him with who else might notice. She didn't know Boaz was paying attention. She didn't know her consistency was being reported. She didn't know her faithfulness was building credibility that she would later need. She simply showed up. And that's what stewardship looks like in real life. So your work with integrity even when your recognition is slow. You stay aligned even when outcomes are unclear. And you trust that God sees what others may not yet. So I'll give you just kind of go back to the Jeremy Melissa story. You know, he would frustrate me so much because I really knew that I could do more. Like the great thing about Taylor is that you if you felt that there was a need in the organization, you could raise your hand and say, "Hey, I think I bring value to this or to Taylor by this XYZ role," right? So I would talk to Jeremy all the time about my career plan, and I was impatient. And he would always be like, "Les, trust me. I got this. I've got this. We're going to get you where you need to go, and it's going to benefit you and it's going to benefit the organization. But I need you to be patient." And I was not a patient gal. And so whenever because there was a couple times where I took it upon myself, like I didn't have the credibility. I wanted to do this and I thought that he was taking too long and it backfired. And so then I'd have to go back and go, "Okay, you were right." And I had to trust him. And that's what Ruth did with Boaz and with everything. She just showed up. And I think that's a super important message. So, um, another reflection pause. How do I show up when no one is watching? Like, think about that. How are you showing up when no one is cheering you on, no one is clapping, no one is giving you all the accolades? How do you show up? Yeah. Okay, moving into the latter part of the story. Um, so this is Ruth chapter 2, verse, let's see, I'm at 21. Let me scroll down here to 21. So in 20, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "He has not show excuse me. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead," she added. "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." She's talking about Boaz. So then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." She said exactly what Boaz had said to her earlier. So she did as Naomi and Boaz had instructed, and she worked very hard with that. So when he offered protection and direction, she didn't push past that. She didn't, we talked about that before. She listened. She stayed within the guidance that she was given, and she remained teachable. That is very, very important as well. Wise leaders know when to listen. Influential people know when to stay aligned, and following well is often what allows influence to grow safely, right? So we always talk about leadership. I'm in leadership development, all those types of things. But there is something about followership. And so following well is just as important as leading well. Okay. So in Ruth 4, um, this might be a plot twist. I'm not sure, unless you've read it before. But here we have Ruth. So I'm going to read 13 through 22. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. Plot twist. Okay, so they get married. And then when he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." So then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Okay, so why is that? Why is that important? Um, and it's important because Ruth then is the great grandmother of King David. So if her influence without the title. If she would not have gone with Naomi and followed Naomi and was faithful and loyal to Naomi to Bethlehem, and then went and worked her butt off in those fields and was noticed by Boaz. She's married to Boaz. She has a child, and then that child then is the lineage of Jesse, who then is the father of David. Pretty absolutely incredible. And this whole time, Ruth did not know that God was building what God was building through her. She simply trusted him with what was in front of him. So another question, like, where might God be asking you to trust his timing instead of rushing the outcomes? It's like my uh word of the year, surrender. Right? Where is God? So when I was trained strategic plan from January to December, and I love doing it. It's like it really jazzes me up. I love it. I didn't do that this year. I did Q1. I will do Q2 in March, but I just did Q1. I probably shouldn't have even done Q1 if I'm going to surrender, but I did. And that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying not to rush, right? I'm trying to give God the wheel, as the famous song, right? Jesus, take the wheel. And I'm trying not to bring it back. Like, I want him to be driving. So where might God be asking you to trust his timing instead of you taking the wheel back and rushing those outcomes? Yeah. So there's quite a few reflection questions this episode. And so I'm hoping that you'll take some time following this to really think about it and think about it through. I'm just going to couple more things and we're going to wrap. And if we've got some extra time, if you're in the central time zone and this is your lunch hour, then I want you to really take some time and think through these reflection questions that we've been talking about today, and read the book of Ruth. It is truly, truly amazing. So what does it look like when we step out of Ruth's story and we're back into Monday morning, or we're back into the workplace, or we're back into Thursday afternoon? What does that look like? Because influence without a title, it it shows up in ordinary places. It's how you treat people when you don't have authority. It's how you respond when your work goes unseen. It's how you remain faithful when recognition is slow. And for some of you, you're in that Ruth season right now. You're doing all the work. You're staying aligned. You're showing up with integrity. And you're wondering, does it matter? But Ruth reminds us that influence is not dormant just because it's quiet. In the workplace, influence is built, right? It's built when you do excellent work consistently. So you're building that credibility. It's built when you listen well and stay teachable. You stay coachable. You choose stewardship over self promotion. That kind of influence builds that trust. It builds it up, it builds it down, and it builds it across an organization. And when the time comes to speak, when it matters, your voice will carry so much more weight because your character has already spoken for you. Does that make sense? Like, I mean, that truly that's a really great nugget right there. So whether you lead a team, you support a leader, or you feel like you're working from the fringes, from the margins, I want you to hear this right here. You don't need permission to influence. You need faithfulness where you are. You don't need permission to influence. So before we close here, I want to bring this back to Valerie, back to my granddaughter, Valerie. She has no title. She has no authority. Well, she has a title. She's the most beautiful granddaughter ever, but she has no authority and she has no agenda. But yet her presence changes the room. She doesn't influence because she's the adult. She influences because she's fully present, because she's trusted, she's cared for, she's attended to. And that's what Ruth shows us too. Ruth didn't know who was watching. She didn't know how far her faithfulness would reach. And quite frankly, she didn't care who was watching. She simply showed up with loyalty, with integrity, and care for what was right in front of her. And that's what Jesus reminds us too. And that's how the kingdom works. Influence doesn't begin when we're in charge. It begins when we're faithful. So as you step back into your workplace, I want to leave you with more questions, right? This is more questions than answers, but I want you to carry these through the week with you. So here they are. Write these down. Where do I already have influence that I've been underestimating? I want you to think about that. You might need to talk that through with some of your, like if you've got a trusted coworker, where do I already have influence that I've been underestimating? And then what would faithfulness look like if I practiced it without needing certainty of an outcome? Like there isn't a quid pro quo, so to speak. What would faithfulness look like if I just practiced it without needing certainty that I was going to get something in return? And then is this a season to build credibility like Ruth or to speak courageously like Esther? Like, where are you at right in this moment with whatever is going on? So let me repeat those. Where do I already have influence that I've been underestimating? What would faithfulness look like if I practiced it without needing certainty? And is this a season to build credibility like Ruth or to speak courageously like Esther? Because both of them matter, and wisdom is knowing the difference, right? Ruth shows us that influence is often formed quietly through loyalty, integrity, faithful work. Esther reminds us that when the moment comes, courage and voice matter deeply. What about Jesus? He shows us that greatness isn't about position at all. It's about how we show up, right? He brought the little children. So as you head back into work today, this week, I want you to work as though God is watching. I want you to trust him with what others may not see. And I want you to remember that you do not need a title to influence. You don't need a title to matter. You don't need recognition to be faithful. I know it feels good. And when you get it, that's amazing. But you don't need it to be effective. And your internal confidence, knowing that God is the reason you're doing what you're doing, is going to be enough recognition that you'll ever need. You don't need certainty to be faithful. Like Ruth, like Esther when the time comes, like a child Jesus lifted up as our example. You're already influencing. That's how you show up, how you work, how you care. You're already doing much more than you think. All right. So if today resonated at all with you, which I'm certainly hopeful that it did, I want you to subscribe if you haven't already, because we do this every month. Topics change. As you know, I live life looking for leadership lessons. I want you to share this episode with a leader who needs to hear it, or somebody who doesn't know they're a leader, who's waiting to influence, and you can see it and they just can't. So I do want you to share it with somebody. That way we can really spread this movement around the world. And if you want more practical conversations about leadership, getting out of that day to day, check out my podcast, Top Floor Please. It's also on Spotify and on this YouTube channel, but that's where we go deeper on leading with intention instead of exhaustion. So as you head back into your work this week, remember this: you don't have to separate your faith from your leadership. Take Jesus with you into your meetings, into your decisions, and into your conversations. And that's what Take Jesus to Work Day is all about. All right, everybody, you've got a few minutes. Please be sitting there and take the few minutes that I'm giving back to you, and spend it reading the book of Ruth and going through those reflection questions, and of course, praying and listening as well. So have a fantastic week, and I will see you next time.